We are happy to come together as a community to talk about this issue that's kind of taken the forefront of Lethbridge and the election issue as well. Our Master of Ceremonies this evening is Peter Etches. He immigrated from England 8 years ago with his wife and 7 children. He is the owner and general manager of AE Cross and has been a photographer for 39 years. He is active in the community and involved with the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce and the Business Networking International. Peter's also a board member of Lethbridge Sports Hall of Fame and vice president membership for the Eye Opener Toastmasters Club, which I might want to join after this. As an avid cyclist, Peter enjoys riding his road bike to raise money for various charities. If he isn't working as a photographer, Peter would probably be a researcher, because one thing many people don't know about Peter is that his psychological profile says that when a subject interests him, he is driven to read all available information on it. Please help me welcome the Master of Ceremonies, Peter Etches. Just one more thing. I would also like to mention that we are streaming live from Feature Productions is streaming live right now as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. When I was asked to be MC at this event, I thought, why have they asked me? Is it because I work across the road? Is it because of my English accent? I think I was speculating, and I think it's okay to speculate sometimes, but on the important issue of fluoride in our water, I don't think we should be speculating. Whether you are a believer or a non-believer, whether you are undecided, we're all gathered here tonight to learn the truth. I'm reminded of a quote that says that we are entitled to our own opinions, but not our own facts. I hope that we will have an open mind, and that we'll have a cordial time, and that we will be mutually respectful of various points of view. I'd like to just run through the program before we get underway. There are going to be 2 speakers, and then afterwards we're going to have questions. And it's as simple as that. Our first speaker is Dr. Dickson. He's a practicing family and community physician in northwest Calgary, and he's done this for 25 years. He's been social justice advocate for 3 decades and one of the leaders in the anti-fluoride movement in Calgary since 1999. He's involved with several volunteer organisations, and I'm just going to read the ones I can pronounce easily because it's been a long day. Results Canada, Medical Mercy Canada, Change for Children, Tools of Peace, and he's also been involved in Guatemala in helping people there. So please help me welcome Dr. Dickson.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks for the invitation here. I'd like to thank Professor Anthony Hall as well. I think he's done an incredible job of putting all this together, and I believe it's on his own dime too, so let's give a little round of applause for him. So I'm, as Peter mentioned, a community physician in Calgary, and people ask me which hospital I'm affiliated with, and they say, well, I am not affiliated with any hospital, and they say, why is that? And I say, well, there's too many sick people in hospitals. Now, that's maybe being a little facetious, because I really admire my colleagues that take good care of patients in hospital, but I really do try to keep my patients out of hospital, and I think that behooves me as a family doctor to do everything I can to keep them healthy and to keep them out of those institutions. And one of the ways I can do that is by having them eat healthy and drink healthy and not smoke and exercise and do all those good things. And one of the main things is not putting substances in your water that are not good for you. So people that have heard me speak before will know that I usually make a confession that I actually voted for water fluoridation in the last referendum in Calgary in 1998. There's been seven referendums or plebiscites in Calgary over the decades. The first 5 defeated fluoridation. The last 2 in 1989 and 1998 passed fluoridation by a very small margin. And that was with a tremendous amount of assistance from Alberta Health Services. They put approximately $250,000 into the campaign in 1998. And that day, that was a lot of money. That put out a lot of glitzy information and a lot of very misleading and some outright false information as well that swayed a significant number of voters. The anti-fluoride group had $0, or whatever they took out of their own pockets. So no government money, no taxpayers' money at all. So if anyone tells you medicine by plebiscite's a good thing, tell them that that's probably not the case. You don't want to be deciding what your neighbors take for medicine, and I don't think you want your neighbors to be deciding what you're taking for medicine either. So I just have a few minutes here. What I'd like to do first is introduce a series of letters. Since we don't, unfortunately, have any pro-fluoride people represented here tonight, Dr. Beck and I, when we were asked to come here initially, were hopeful that there would be pro-fluoridation people here to have a good, solid debate about this issue. Because there's obviously two sides to it, or there wouldn't be a controversy. However, anything that is this controversial, obviously we shouldn't be doing. It should be stopped until it's proven not to be controversial. So these 3 letters here, the first one is by Dr. Talbot, who is our new Chief Medical Officer of Health for Alberta. And this, and there's copies at the back. Anthony Hall has copies made for you if you don't already have them. This is essentially blatant interference in the political process using taxpayers' money. That's not allowed. That is not ethical, it's not moral. There's just something wrong with that process. So Dr. Beck in his presentation is going to tackle, and if you look at the letter too, well, I'm not even going to bother going there because I take up all my time just refuting the many errors and discrepancies in that letter. But Dr. Beck will tackle those more thoroughly in a few minutes. There's 2 other letters that Chris will put up there for us as well. And one of them is by Mr. Frey, and he has disseminated all this information. He also works with Alberta Health, and so he is facilitating this interference in your political process here in Lethbridge. And the third one is by a gentleman from Saskatchewan, and let's see if I can just pull up his credentials here. Oh, there we go. And that is from Dr. Jerry Bouzbach, who is the president of the Canadian Association of Public Health Dentistry. And again, many discrepancies, many errors, many misleading facts or insinuations in that letter as well. So again, copies of all 3 of those letters are in the back, and Dr. Beck will address those a little more thoroughly in a couple of minutes. So there are so many things that I could say here tonight that I could talk to you about. I'm going to leave the science to Dr. Beck because he is both a PhD and a medical doctor, and he has delved, as I have too, into a lot of the science over the last 15 years. But what happened after I did vote for fluoride in 1998 is friends and colleagues came to me and said, well, Dr. Dickson, have you actually looked at the information? And I said, not really. I trusted Alberta Health and Calgary Health Services at the time to provide me with good information. And they said, well, you really should look at it, so I did. And I was appalled by what I found there, by what I saw in international and national literature. There is just absolutely no reason in the world that we should be putting a foreign substance like this into our water. I was fortunate to be working with half a dozen dentists in Calgary that are very anti-fluoride. They don't even allow fluoride across their doorsteps in their clinic. And so they said, well, we need a good medical researcher to come along with us. And so I thought of my mentor, Dr. Beck, from my medical school days in the 80s. And fortunately, I asked Jim to join us, and he did. And he has been the Canadian leader in fluoridation and anti-fluoridation over the last about 14 years now. So I think so highly of Jim and his credentials and his ethics and his morals. He does all this on his own dime as well. No funding, obviously no honor and glory in this. We get attacked many times by the powers that be. But I very much admire, Jim, what you've done. So just to wrap up a couple of things from my side, we were, as you likely know, successful in Calgary in getting the fluoridation taps turned off in May of 2011. It was about an 11-year process for Jim and I and the other people that assisted us in Calgary to educate our councillors there and to actually get them to finally vote to turn it off. The last part of that process was a presentation to the Special Services Committee and the Special Policy Committee in January of 2011. And I'm just going to read you a couple of points from my presentation that kind of sum up my feelings on this issue. One of it is that I fail to understand how ingesting one of the most toxic substances on the planet without control of dose or dosage and without monitoring or follow-up could ever be considered safe. This defies the oath I've taken as a physician to do no harm to patients and to humankind. What we're putting in, of course, and Jim will address this further, is hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is scrubbed out of fertilizer stacks primarily in southern states and in China. And this volatile substance, this toxic substance, is not allowed by strict law and regulation to be put into the land, the air, the sea, rivers, lakes, streams. It can't be put anywhere on this planet except into your drinking water. Does that sound right? Another thing that's extremely important in this argument is the precautionary principle that says if you are uncertain, don't do it. Well, most certainly we're uncertain about this issue. There's over 800 good studies out there now that provide a great degree of uncertainty. So obviously the precautionary principle says, don't do it, let's stop it, let's study it, and if somehow they can prove that it's safe, and that it's good, and it's right, and it's doing something useful, then we can put it back in. But let's not continue doing it when there's so much controversy around it. The pro side always brings up that fluoridation is good for children and the poor. We have numerous studies to show that that is not the case, but they always try to pull the heartstrings with that one. Just to sum up, the last few points that I made to that Special Policy Committee, British Columbia is 95% unfluoridated. Europe, 97% unfluoridated. Quebec, 96% unfluoridated. Okay, so those provinces, those countries, their teeth are falling out, they have no teeth left, they're edentulated? I don't think so. Their teeth are at least as good, and in many cases better, than ours in fluoridated areas. Dr. Arvid Carlson, who won the PhD, he has a PhD and he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2001, and he called fluoridation the biggest fraud ever propagated against society. There's over 7,000 scientists from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the States, that have petitioned the US Congress to put a moratorium on water fluoridation. There's now over 4,000 professionals worldwide that have signed on to a campaign and a letter to halt water fluoridation. Two very prominent physicians, one who is now deceased, Dr. John Colquhoun from New Zealand, who is the head of the New Zealand Dental Program, and our own Canadian Dr. Hardy Lineback, who just recently retired as the head of preventative dentistry at the University of Toronto. Both those gentlemen were very strong pro-fluoridationists for a good part of their careers, until in the 1990s, they actually looked closely at the world literature, studied it inside and out, and both changed their minds and became very avid anti-fluoridationists. Dr. Hardy Lineback I consider to be the most knowledgeable dentist in Canada on the water fluoridation issue. He is strongly anti-fluoride. And almost every pro-fluoridation presentation I've seen has quoted the UK study, 2001, out of England, as being one of these gold standards that promotes water fluoridation. We have in our hands a letter from the head of the advisory committee for that particular study, and he strongly chastises anyone who uses that study, the UK study, to promote water fluoridation, as he says is often done by fluoride proponents. That is just not allowed by the people that put the study together themselves. And yet day after day, week after week, we see the York study promoted by the pro-fluoridationists as saying that fluoride is good, fluoride is safe, we should continue fluoridation. So those are some of the things that we face day to day. And so without further ado, I think we'll pass it back to Peter here to introduce our esteemed scientist.
Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to just say thank you to Dr. Dickson for his comments. I'd like to also mention that Dr. Gary Fong, who is the president of Alberta Dental Association and College, and his delegates declined an invitation to speak in favour of fluoride this evening. Our next speaker, Dr. Beck, holds doctorates in medicine and biophysics. He was urged 9 years ago to look at the issue of fluoridation in the city of Calgary by a family physician who opposed it. He was appalled at the ethics of the practice and joined a small committee of 1 physician and 5 dentists trying to stop fluoridation in the city. And he began a study of scientific literature on fluoride's effects. He has since lobbied city councils and engaged in public debate. He is currently Professor Emeritus of Medical Biophysics at the University of Calgary. Please help me welcome Dr. Beck.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Dr. Dickson, for your kind comments. I would like to change my usual pattern here and try to give you a view of the problem and how we might divide it and look at it. And then give a little attention, as Dr. Dickson promised, to the letter, in particular the letter from Dr. James Talbot, our new Chief Medical Officer of Health of Alberta Health Services. So these are the questions I think we have to answer. Let's see, I have it on my screen, but I don't have it up there. What do I do? There we go. First of all, is it effective in preventing caries, dental caries or cavities? That's what it's given to us for that purpose. So we have to decide, is it effective for that purpose? And secondly, we have to ask, and even more importantly, is it safe? Is it safe for us to ingest it all our lives at an uncontrolled dosage? And it's a product which has been mentioned, hydrofluorosilicic acid was used in over 90 or 95% of the jurisdictions in North America that fluoridate their water. I hadn't really planned to go into that, but if you have any questions about that, I'd be glad to deal with them. It's not the same thing as Alberta Health Services contends. It's not the same thing as the natural fluoride that is found in the sources of city water. It behaves very differently in very critical ways. So the question of safety is more complex than these other questions, but it's obviously a very important one. And thirdly, the question is it ethical? And that's something you don't need a scientific background to judge. We all have the obvious right to make a judgment on that question, whatever our background might be. And so let me go quickly through these, and I just want to I know graphs are not attractive to many people, but it reminds me of what to say to you, I guess. Here we have a representation of data taken by the World Health Organization over a period spanning from the early 1960s until 2004. And the axis over there, DMFT, stands for decayed, missing, filled teeth. So you look at it goes from 0 up to 9. It's how many teeth, how many of those teeth are either diseased, missing, filled, and that is considered a reasonable estimate of the incidence or prevalence of cavities. So there are 18 countries represented here, data from 18 countries over that period of several decades. And what you see here, happily, is a decrease in the prevalence of cavities. And this is a good thing. But you look at that, all that data together, and then look over here on the right side, and you'll see a list of the 18 countries. 14 of them are not fluoridated, and 4 are fluoridated. And there's no difference in that their experience with dental caries. It is interesting, you see, and this is something that the promoters of fluoridation lean heavily on, that when fluoridation got started, which was in the late 50s and early 1960s, then cavities, the prevalence of cavities began to decrease. Wow, look what fluoride has done for us. But, you know, the philosophers of science and logicians have a statement it says, after which, therefore, because of which. But that's considered a fallacy, because obviously that's not any definite indication of a connection between what occurred before and what followed. So it's clear here from this that it doesn't depend upon the use of fluoridated water to get this decrease in the prevalence of cavities. So that's I think, a rather convincing bit of evidence with respect to whether it's effective. There's a lot more evidence that is done more systematically on particular studies, and it shows on almost all of those carefully done studies no benefit from having used fluoridated water. And in fact, there are a few studies that show very slight, apparently very slight benefit. But those, if you read those papers carefully, you find something missing there. And what's missing is the dealing with the effect of delayed eruption of the teeth. Eruption of the teeth in babies is what occurs when the teeth come through the gums. So they've developed under the gums, and then they come through the gums and exposed in the mouth, where they're exposed to the causes of cavities. That can be delayed as much as a year if those babies are exposed to fluoridated water in their formula or in their bottles of water. So if they're not exposed, they're not going in the mouth, they're not going to get cavities. So if you do a study across a group defined by the age, then those that have used fluoridated water, you would expect fewer cavities, because their teeth weren't in their mouth. But as they get older, there's no such indication of benefit. So in this second graph, apologies for the graph, but look, this is some data obtained by Dr. Bill Osmondson, who's a dentist in Oregon, who's a practiced dentist for 30-some-odd years and also has a master's degree in public health. The black line here is that starts at 0 and goes up to 100%. Are the states in the United States with the percent of the population that's using fluoridated water. So there are 50 states, and you can see that there. Yes. This is nice. Yes. Okay, this is the one that shows the states, right? the percent that's fluoridated of the population. Here, there's a high-income group. The families were interviewed and were asked whether they considered children to have good or excellent teeth. And you can see that they're over 80% regularly across this graph over this span of percentages of population fluoridated. Whereas if you look at the low-income children, then there's a much more variable response to these questions, but they're all lower. So that we're down to 50-some-odd% of parents are reporting for the good or excellent condition of teeth of their children. So what's going on? It doesn't look good for the argument that fluoridation is giving the children better teeth. Now, that's all I want to say about efficacy, but you're welcome to question me about it and about what further evidence I have read that has convinced me that it's not substantially effective. Well, I should remark on efficacy that even the organizations such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States and the American Dental Association, as far back as 1999, agreed that the benefits, and both those organizations thought there was a great benefit, they said the benefit is due to a topical effect, the contact of fluoridated water on the teeth, enamel, not due to swallowing it. So why swallow it? And then the part of that decrease you saw in the prevalence of fluoride of cavities could well be because in the early 70s, more and more countries in the industrialized world, where those 18 countries are, started having access to fluoridated toothpaste. Well, with fluoridated toothpaste, there's some evidence that that's effective in reducing the incidence of cavities. But as the warnings exist, at least in the United States where it's legally required, it's warned that the toothpaste should not be swallowed. You should, if you use fluoridated toothpaste, you should several times rinse your mouth thoroughly and spit out, and don't swallow the fluoride. So if the benefit is very small, if it exists at all, and if it occurs only due to contact with the teeth, then there's really no need to swallow it. So that makes the next question about whether there are harms even more interesting, because you're not gaining much by risking harm. So let's see if there are harms risked. Well, even promoters of fluoridation admit, and are forced to admit by the facts, that dental fluorosis is a consequence of using fluoridated water. And here's what happens on this graph. You see there along the bottom, there are the concentrations of fluoride in the water, in the tap water, and here's what the caries experience. That is what number of cavities people have. That doesn't change as you change the concentration. But if you look at the fluorosis, dental fluorosis, you see how markedly it rises as the concentration rises. Well, in the United States, oh, by the way, this is what fluorosis looks like. And these categories, mild, moderate, severe, are terms used in an old technical classification of fluorosis. When I say somebody has mild fluorosis, I don't mean that's okay. I've had young people come up to me after a lecture like this and show me their mottled teeth. They don't want to smile. They don't go places with their friends because of the appearance of their teeth. And they are the ones that the promoters of fluoridation are thinking of when they say, oh, that's okay. It's just what's the term for?
Cosmetic.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't matter, you see, it's just how you look. And that, I just can't understand how you can muster enough arrogance to say it is to yourself to decide whether that teenager has global teeth or not. But if you go a little further into the severity of the case, this is what moderate fluorosis looks like. And you start getting not just involved discoloration of the teeth, not just white mottling, but you also get brown and orange staining, and there are pits and fissures that appear, and the enamel is becoming more brittle. And severe fluorosis can give you problems like this. So now this condition, dental fluorosis, which Peter Cooney, our former Chief Dental Officer of Health in Canada, says is negligible in Canada. The 49th parallel doesn't seem to me to have any capacity to stop fluorosis from going higher or lower. But we don't have enough data in Canada because the only study done in modern times was done on 15 cities, 5 were fluoridated and 10 were not, and they didn't show us anything really. But in the United States, they looked at the whole country, areas where there's fluoridation, areas where there's not fluoridation, and this is the percent of people with dental fluorosis in different age groups. So you see the 12 to 15-year-olds, 41% of them have dental fluorosis. Now most of it is mild dental fluorosis. I don't think that's a negligible effect. But some of them, like maybe 3%, have severe fluorosis. And the overall rate for the whole population is something like 30% of people. That includes people with and without fluoridated water lumped together. So that's, what happened to harms? I've got it here. Oh, there we go. So we go on to some other toxic effects. You see the harms can be teeth, which we just talked about, but it also affects bone, the thyroid system, the reproductive system, and the brain, and the cardiovascular system. Without doubt, there are associations of, thank you. I imagine he told me how to do that before. So these are associations. We don't say cause until we really are sure. And by the way, often we're told, oh, the scientific paper says this needs more research, that this doesn't prove causation or something. But just to show association means we need to find out with further investigation whether it's a cause or not. In some of these effects on teeth, bone, thyroid, reproductive system, and brain are quite clearly, the associations are strong, and they're found in lots of studies. And as an example of how you can try to resolve that, well, some of you can remember it was back in the 1950s when it was first recognized that there was some association between smoking cigarettes and having lung cancer. Well, it was a long time before we brought that up to a more firm association, and ultimately with laboratory studies as well as human epidemiology stories, it became a proven fact. So in the case of thyroid, you see that we know from epidemiological studies that, say, a population where there's thyroid, where there's fluoridated water, there's more hypothyroidism than in a population where there's not using fluoridated water. This is especially true among people who have a low intake of iodine in their diet, which is not uncommon in Canada and the United States, and particularly threatening for pregnant women and their fetuses. But that would be just an epidemiological study that shows an association. But in the case of the thyroid system, we know from laboratory studies how that effect on the thyroid system occurs. Because we know from laboratory studies that the fluoride ion, which is what's in the, we're trying to add to the water, poisons the activity of enzymes. And the thyroid system depends on the balance between different forms of the thyroid hormone, and those forms change from one way or another depending on the activity of the enzymes. So we know the mechanism, and there's also an effect directly on the thyroid gland. So that's one of the things I consider the most certain. Now, in the reproductive system, we've had epidemiological studies which show in girls a early onset of menstruation by 6 months, and one of the big studies done at the beginning in 1945. And there are studies that show a lower quality and lower number of sperm in human males. And the very interesting thing has to do with the brain and the development of the neurological system. Now, one of the ways that sort of called our attention to this was the studies mostly done in China because of circumstances permitted such studies, and because in the United States and Canada, no one with the money was interested in doing such studies. But they found that the IQ of the children was related to exposure to fluoride in their drinking water. And that the more exposure to fluoride they had, the lower was their IQ. Now there are 37 such studies done. 2 of them have shown a very slight difference in the average IQ between the high exposure and the low exposure, where the IQ was a little bit higher in the high exposure to fluoride. But in the other 35 studies, it's like the reverse. It shows that the lower IQ is associated with a higher exposure to fluoride. Well, and last year, there was what's called a meta-analysis of 27 of those studies that were thought to be strong enough to warrant criticism and examination. And they found that there was an aggregate difference in the average IQ of high exposure compared to lower exposures that was different. And the way that the meta-analysis presents that data is by measuring it against what fraction of the statistical term, median error, the standard error. And so there was a change due to exposure to fluoride, the study concluded, of minus 0.45. Well, what that relates to, what that really means in terms of IQ, is a difference of 6.9, say 7 IQ points. So that the children that were using high fluoride water were, on average, 7 IQ points lower on the scale than those that were using water with lower fluoride. And it's interesting that one of the, did you tell them about this? One of the medical officers of health in the northern region was testifying in front of the council at a public meeting in Red Deer and referred to this meta-analysis and made the point that there was essentially no difference because this was only minus 0.45 IQ points. He either didn't read the paper or he didn't understand it because it was not minus 0.45 IQ points. It was minus 6.9 IQ points. Now that could change the percentage of say, in a population with a normal distribution, that bell-shaped curve you're probably all familiar with, distribution of IQ, that could mean that instead of 2% of the population needing social services and medical assistance because they had what psychologists would call mental retardation, instead of 2%, there might be 4%. And on the other end of the scale, instead of 2% geniuses, you would have less than 1% geniuses. So that's not a trivial result, and it needs more investigation. Now, one of the medical officers of health that Dr. Dickson and I had private conversation with admitted that this new investigation indicated that we need more research. Well, why do we need more research? Because we're uncertain, right? So his position was, until we're certain, we'll keep giving you fluoride. Now that's backwards. What he should do, instead of saying we'll keep giving it to you until someone else somewhere has proven that it's harmful, we should stop it until someone proves incontrovertibly that it's not harmful. And that applies to every argument about possible harms here. The responsible thing is to wait till you're sure it's not going to hurt us, especially when the possible benefit is so small. Now, the medical ethics question, I guess I shouldn't take more time to do. Have I used up my time here? 5 minutes more? Okay. I was going to get to Dr. Talbot's letter, so let me not do that. I think most of you will recognize that you're not informed about the fluoride you're given. It's forced on you, that you don't have the capacity to stop it if you don't want it, and the effects on you as individuals is not monitored. Now, all three of those things are required by medical ethics, whether before a procedure can be done or a drug can be administered. And again, hydrofluorosilicic acids, and indeed fluoride, iron, are drugs. And they're not approved for human consumption. And they haven't been tested toxicologically. So let me, if we can see Dr. Talbot's letter again, I'll just make a few comments on that quickly. Yes, okay. Okay, good, I can walk around, I have to walk around. You're lucky that I didn't discover this earlier. So Dr. Talbot says that those of us who question this practice are doing so despite strong evidence that fluoride is safe and effective in maintaining dental health. Well, I think I've covered that. And if I haven't covered it to your satisfaction, please question me further. And then he goes on to say it protects tooth enamel against acids. Well, there's no evidence that it does that. And then he cites this figure that for every dollar spent on water fluoridation, $38 in dental treatment costs are prevented, is a result of a bizarre and so-called investigation written by a couple of non-dentist, non-scientist employees of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. One of the little things they neglected to do, see, they like to pump up this cost, so they included in the cost of dental care the loss of income for the mother who brought the children to the dentist. Now, I've never heard of anyone losing an hour or two income because they had to take their child to the dentist. But that's the kind of so-called research that he's referring to here. Then this is the issue of children in low-income families being benefited because they can get fluoride, assuming they get that it has a benefit, as well as children from higher income families. Well, that question has been raised often enough that there have been a number of studies, scientific, competently done investigations to precisely to answer this question? And the answer is no. It's not the fluoride that makes a difference between the dental experiences of the low-income children and high-income children. It's the income. And there is a very strong relation, linear relation, between family income and the number of cavities children have. It's inverse. The richer your family is, the fewer cavities you have. And then, well, I've already remarked on this. On dental fluorosis, the Centers for Disease Control, I think, did I just say something about it? Oh, the medical officers of health often tell us that they follow the literature. But you know what they do? I don't understand this either. They say, when we challenge them with evidence of harm, that there's no evidence of harm. Well, I've read hundreds of papers about evidence of harm. Even just possible evidence of harm means they should sit up and take notice. But in some cases, it's more than just possible. We're fairly certain about the association. And but they always claim that they follow the medical literature. They follow the medical literature with their eyes closed. Because how is it I can see, and Dr. Dickson can see all those papers in those journals, if they can't? So I don't want to attack these people, these health officials, personally in any way, but I have to tell you what these disconnects are, because our counselors and you who talk to your counselors are trying to pick out whether this nobody walks in off the street like me and tells them this is a bad thing, and all those medical officers and dental officers of health and say to them it's a good thing. Well, which one of us has the evidence? And that's what I'm trying to convince you of. So, what else did the good Dr. Talbot say here? Pardon? Oh, yes, I was looking for that. Okay, this is a little bit of spin, I must say, that often I hear medical officers of health use this kind of argument. They say, well, why don't you complain about fortifying milk with vitamin D? Or flour with what are we using to prevent birth defects? You know, folic acid. And then they give those examples. You see, well, that's not what we're talking about. Folic acid and iodine to prevent thyroid disease, and vitamin D are nutrients. They're required natural substances required for human health. Furthermore, we know with some considerable certainty what the highest level of exposure to vitamin D and iodine and folic acid is before harm occurs. And we know for lower limits what's required for good health. And there's a wide margin in between the two. So by limiting the amount we put of vitamin D we put in the milk, or the folic acid in the flour, and so on, we can be very certain that we're not going to get too much or too little. You can't do that with fluoride, even if you assume that fluoride has any beneficial effect, because they put it in the water and people drink the water they need. And that varies at least 20-fold in any given population. The great difference you can imagine between a construction worker in a hot climate in the summer and the office worker in an air-conditioned building. And furthermore, infants, as an example, drink a lot more water than healthy people. I mean, well, when infants are healthy, infants drink a lot more water per unit body weight, and they need to, than it will an adult. So there's no effective control of dose. And, well, I'll leave the discussion of the toxins that come along with the fluoride and the difference between hydrofluorosilicic acid and calcium fluoride for your questions if you have any. So I guess I should stop. Peter, you want to?
Thank you, Dr. Beck. I'd like to just take a moment to mention about this book. I'm not on commission, by the way. This is a book that Dr. Beck has co-authored, The Case Against Fluoride. I've read this book and it's very interesting. It goes into a lot more detail along the lines Dr. Beck presented. I'd like to just share with you one quote. It says here, an ancient Roman adage says, whatever touches all must be approved by all. We all have a voice in this issue, and we need to know the facts. Whenever I give talks on controversial and subjects that are not very well known, I often always say to people, don't take my word for it. The facts are available. Decide for yourself. It's so much easier to embrace the truth if you discover the truth for yourself. I'd like to open the question period of our meeting. There's a mic just over there near the door. If you'd like to ask any questions, if you try and keep them concise, because if the questions are too long, the person answering the question forgets what you're talking about. So if you'd like to make your way up there, if you have any questions for our guests, just go straight ahead.
I'm Tony Hall from the University of Lethbridge, and welcome everyone. I just think we need to get a little more clarity on what this letter is and why we keep emphasizing it. It's from James Talbot, Chief Medical Officer of Health of Alberta, and it's addressed to Ms. Rena Wass, and all the candidates got their own copy of this. So this was one of 3 letters forwarded by the Chief Medical Officer of Health during the election to the candidates. So the Chief Medical Officer is intervening in our local election to try to affect the outcome of the local election. So this is a public official of the government of Alberta using Alberta tax money to try to influence the outcome of an Alberta election, and that seems to me to be inappropriate intervention in our local politics. And it would have been very helpful to see somebody from Mr. Talbot, Dr. Talbot come in and talk in this forum, or Dr. Fong. Anyway, just to clarify what that letter is, and maybe you have some thoughts about the politics of this and the ethics of this kind of political intervention from Chief Medical Health Officer.
Thanks, Tony. I'd just like to make a quick comment too on the ethics side of it. Councillors are in a very difficult position. They work really hard, at least in Calgary and I think in Lethbridge as well, many, many hours for maybe not as much pay as a lot of other professions. And they have a lot of science to pour over and a lot of facts and figures and a lot of different issues to tackle. And so what finally won us over in Calgary, or what won the councillors over in Calgary, was the admission finally that they cannot be scientists. They cannot discern, they cannot pour through all this plethora of information out there, the scientific information, and make really good informed decisions because there's information coming at them from all sides. So what finally happened in Calgary was that they made that decision based on the ethics and morality of it all, and that's how you can approach your councillors here too. Councillors need not be scientists, nor need they to be highly qualified to deal with ethics or morality. But that's where they can base their decision on, is that ethics and morality, because that's how they govern you folks. So mass medicating with one of the most toxic elements in the world, without control of dose or dosage, and without monitoring it or follow-up, is neither ethical nor moral. That's where your counselors can base that decision on. So your main question is how much hydrofluorosilicic acid is present?
Yes.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what it is in Lethbridge. I think it's 0.7 parts per million. In Calgary, it's 0.7 as well. It's been lowered from 1 part to 0.8 to 0.7. In our two rivers in Calgary, we have natural calcium chloride.
Just a second. I don't know how much is added to water. I want to know how much is in the water.
How much is in the water? Not exactly sure what you're asking.
Well, what happens when you add hydrofluorosilicic acid to water?
So basically what's done is they top up the natural calcium chloride that's in water. That's what I was starting to say. In the two rivers in Calgary, we have 0.2 parts per million in the Bow River that feeds the north part of Calgary, and the 0.3 parts per million calcium fluoride, which is much different than hydrofluorosilicic acid. So then they're topping up 0.4 and 0.5 parts per million in the various parts of Calgary. So I'm assuming you have something similar here in Lethbridge.
Well, wait a second. Dr. Beck, do you know what I'm after here?
I'm sorry, I don't hear well. Can you state your question again clearly?
Yes, what actually happens when you add hydrofluorosilicic acid to water? You commented on there being a difference between sodium fluoride and hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Okay, yes, that's an important question, and the answer is that most of the hydrofluorosilicic acid molecules dissociate, and they produce in this dissociation a lot of fluoride ions. That's where the fluorine atom plus an electron has a 1 electronic charge, negative charge, and it's floating around in the water solution. But in fact, the hydrofluorosilicic acid also produces fluorosilicates, which have been observed to cause damage to the mucosa, the lining of the stomach and intestines. But and there's a lot of questions are raised by promoters and criticizing us, the critics, by saying you're worried about hydrofluorosilicic acid, but it all dissolves and dissociates when you add it to the water in the water treatment plant, and it's tremendously diluted. But that's irrelevant. What counts is what ends up in the stomach. And that large dose of fluoride ions enters the stomach, which is very acidic. That means it has a lot of hydrogen ions floating around. And the hydrogen ions, with 1 plus electronic charge, unites with the fluoride ion to form a neutral hydrofluoric acid, which can cross the membranes of the stomach and intestine and enter the blood. And in the blood, some of it dissociates as you have fluoride ion again. But a lot of it stays as hydrofluoric acid. And that can enter cells. And that's where it poisons enzymes. And that's where it interferes with the signaling mechanism of cross-cell membranes. You see, say it's a hormone that's water-soluble floating around in your bloodstream can't get in the cells because the cell membrane is mostly fatty substance. So the evolutionists provided a mechanism for getting the signal that, oh, there's a hormone out there to the inside to start the activity of the cell, or inhibit it, whichever is a normal process. And so what happens is that the fluoride ion poisons this system. So the reason their effects of fluoride are observed on so many different body systems is because of their effects on enzymes and effects on the signaling mechanism across the membranes of the cells. And those two mechanisms, cross-membrane signaling and enzyme activity occur in all the tissues of the body. So you would expect to have a multiple problem. And the fact that we have fluoride, natural fluoride in the water that we get from sources that goes into the water treatment plant is important to be identified as calcium fluoride. And it doesn't dissociate as much as the fluoride ions from hydrofluorosic acid. So a great part of the fluoride we swallow as calcium fluoride is disposed of in the feces. Whereas in the other case, it's half of it that enters the bloodstream, roughly half is excreted through the kidney. And the other half is sequestered in the body, mostly in bone. Over your whole life, you have those fluoride entities in your bones from the water that you took as a 1-year-old. And that's why it's important to not just be satisfied that we're saying we're topping up the fluoride in the water by adding hydrofluorosic acid. What you're doing is something entirely different. I guess I went on too far. Did it answer your question, though?
Well, yeah. What you're suggesting is that the fluoride is the culprit once it becomes protonated to form hydrofluoric acid. But the point remains that the amount of hydrofluorosic acid that is actually dissolved in water, I mean, there isn't any. It all hydrolyzes to form fluoride ion, silicon dioxide, and the hydronium cation.
Stand in front of the speaker. Oh, can you repeat that again, please?
Oh, sorry. Okay, and when you add hydrofluorosilicic acid to water, it reacts, doesn't it? To form 6 equivalents of fluoride, hydronium cation, and silicon dioxide. And you're suggesting that fluorosilicates are also a product here. What, in fact, is the toxic element of this mixture, as far as you're concerned? You're suggesting that it's fluoride itself.
Yeah. The two of the resultant products that I have mentioned that I know something about are the fluoride ion and the fluorosilicates.
Okay.
And that's
what's the difference between the fluoride ion formed from hydrofluorosilicic acid and the fluoride ion you would get from, say, sodium fluoride?
Well, fluoride ion is a fluoride ion, wherever it comes from. Now, we don't see much sodium fluoride. There are a few, very few, jurisdictions that use sodium fluoride of a pharmaceutical grade, purified, to fluoridate their water. And the sodium fluoride essentially completely dissolves and dissociates. But then the fluoride that gets into the stomach, of course, it largely forms hydrofluoric acid. So in the case of hydrofluorosilicic acid, it's all these other products involved as well. They're all at low concentrations, except for the resulting hydrofluoric acid in the stomach.
What about the fluoride treatments that you get at the dentist? Dental fluoride treatments? What's the fluoride source there?
I'm not certain, but I think it's sodium fluoride.
Sodium fluoride.
And it's a pharmaceutical grade, and it's applied directly to the enamel of the teeth, and hopefully under very cautious conditions to prevent its being swallowed. Though some will be absorbed through the mucosa of the gums and so on. But then I think that they usually use fluoride application that has maybe 4,000 parts per million as compared to less than 1 in your high fluoridated water. But it's only applied for a few minutes. And then your mouth is thoroughly rinsed and you spit out, and you rinse and you spit out. And that has to be done carefully, by the way. There have been at least one case I know of a child who was not properly instructed and swallowed after the treatment and died 4 hours later. So that's a lot of fluoride when they put it directly on the teeth. But that's where there's some evidence that it's effective in preventing cavities.
Actually, I'll pass it on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Bev Trainer, and I just wanted to clarify a point that I thought you made earlier. It sounded to me as though you were indicating that the use of fluoride from the time of youth or whenever in your life you started to ingest it, the aftermath of that part of it does stay with you for the rest of your life. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, children absorb almost all of the fluoride that they take into their bodies. Adults absorb about 50%, and those amounts accumulate over life.
Question for Dr. Beck. Can you comment a little bit more on the studies that back up efficacy for the actual enamel matrix buildup that fluoride is purported to have for your teeth? Can you offer commentary on that, if it's valid, and if so, to what extent and under what conditions and with what risks?
Well, the evidence for the efficacy of treatment of topical fluoride in the dentist's office is something I'm not nearly as familiar with as these other aspects. And but the evidence does suggest that it is effective in preventing cavities. Sometimes it's argued by the promoters that even if it's effective only topically, we should still be swallowing it because the fluoride ion reappears in the saliva. And the saliva is secreted into the mouth and it bathes the teeth 24 hours a day. However, if you do measurements on the concentration of the fluoride ion in saliva, you come up with something like 0.016 parts per million. There aren't many papers on this. It hasn't been done much. But that compares to what's considered now to be an effective 0.7 part per million. You know, so that most chemists that I've heard comment on this would say that's not enough to make any measurable difference in the terms of getting fluoride ion into the tooth enamel, where it replaces hydroxyl entities on the apatite, which is a hard substance, and it's more resistant to decay. So that the topical effect is not manifest by water fluoridation. The topical effect you get in the dentist office probably is effective.
And can you comment on that topical effect? Like, how permanent is it? And is it how similar is it or dissimilar is it to your normal enamel matrix?
Well, what is thought to occur is that the fluoride ion enters the tooth enamel, and as I just said, and it becomes part of what's called fluoroapatite. It changes hydroxyl apatite into fluoroapatite, which is considered more resistant to decay. Now, I have seen one interesting paper, and this is the only paper on it, and I don't know how strong we can consider this evidence, but it was done with a physical technique called photoelectronography. So what the researchers did was apply fluoride ion to the teeth and measure where it went, how deep it got. And what we're talking here about is 1 or 2 nanometers, billionths of a meter that it enters. But 1 or 2 nanometers is about what is worn off your teeth in normal life. So their suggestion was, yes, it does enter the enamel, but not very far. It doesn't get to stay there very much. But I don't think there's very good, strong evidence one way or another on
Okay. And sorry, Dr. Beck, can I ask something else just along those lines? Yeah, I'll give you a moment to get over there. Can you also offer comment too on the whole body effect of that? I know that there's many systems affected, but in particular, what it does to bone structure, to the bony skeletal structure of the body. You know, if we see the evidence that you're presenting there that shows the effects of dental fluorosis, what implications does that have on bone health and bone longevity? I mean, I've heard of studies that report that it increases bone density, and they consider that a positive. But also I've heard the flip side of that, that it actually might increase density, but that's not a good thing. It increases the brittleness of the bone as well, which increases the incidence of hip fractures. Can you offer some comment on the implications for the entire skeletal structure?
Well, what the incorporation of the fluoride into bone does increase bone density. But what is bone density? Well, there are two kinds of measurements that I'm familiar with. One is the mass density, that how many grams of bone per say cubic centimeter of how many grams of bone material in a certain volume, and that is increased. Another kind would be of bone density would be the density of the actual fluoride ions. And the increase in bone density has been observed, but it has not been observed to increase the strength of bone. And in fact, as you mentioned, evidence suggests that the bone is more brittle when it's been exposed to fluoride, and it's absorbed fluoride to the extent that it does up to during your lifetime. So this has implications for a very common disease of osteoporosis and so on. It's but I think it's clear that it's not a good thing.
So, can you also offer comment on what is the lifespan of fluoride that's been sequestered in the body, in the bone? What's the approximate lifespan of that? Is it indefinite, or does it come out of your body as it purges through your body eventually?
Yeah. Well, of course, as you're picking up bone, fluoride during your whole life, if every half of what you ingest stays in your body, 99% of that in the bone. The pineal gland is an example of where it's very, very markedly absorbed. And that may be the explanation for this effect of early menstruation observed, because the pineal gland produces melatonin, which regulates the development of the sexual system. And so what the turnover is, what a kineticist would call it, the exchange of fluoride in and out of bones, is going to be very different than it would be for in and out of the kidney tissue or the pineal tissue. And so what we can be sure of is that if 50% of it stays in your body is building up its burden of fluoride throughout your whole life. Now, let's say if you stop ingesting fluoride at age 35 or something, what happens after that? Well, there will be some loss of fluoride. If you don't get fluoride from other sources to a large extent, and you're not drinking fluoridated water, you will get rid of some of that. But probably not much of that, because the turnover, say, between bone and blood is going to be very low.
Right.
And I'm not familiar with any good observations on that turnover and reception after stopping fluoridation.
Okay. And finally, can I ask you, what is the most serious whole body health implication of the accumulation of fluoride in the body, that, as you see it with your research and your history in dealing with this subject? What do you think is the most compelling argument against, as far as whole body damage is concerned?
Okay, the two things that I think are most compelling, in my view, are the effects on the development of the neurological system and the effects on the thyroid system. The development of the neurological, an effect on the neurological development is important because it's not reversible. And we don't understand very much of it. By the way, we have more than just these epidemiological studies that relate higher fluoride exposure with lower IQ. We have studies on animals that show histologic, that is by examining the tissue in detail, that show adverse changes associated with incorporation of fluoride ion. And then we have similar studies on aborted fetuses. There are only 3 of those papers, but there are 150, I think, of animal studies showing this kind of thing. The other one that is compelling, I mentioned, was the thyroid system, effect on the thyroid system. The reason I think that is exceptionally important because the development of the thyroid system in the fetus and in early childhood is critical to the development of all our other systems.
Yes.
And those faults in development are not reversible, or not to a great extent. So I don't mean to dismiss those other concerns, but these two that I've just mentioned, I think, are particularly visible. You know, it's not hard to understand why that worries me.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll just take one more question and then we'll have some concluding comments from our speakers.
My name is Michael Pratt. I'm a retired medical practitioner from here in Lethbridge. And I've been studying this subject for about a year now, since fluoride-free Lethbridge introduced me to it. And it certainly seems to me that no reasonable person who has studied the evidence could doubt that we must stop fluoride as soon as we possibly can. But the difficulty is to get it through to people who don't want to believe that. And we've seen all these letters from rather arrogant medical professionals and dental professionals. And how do we get it through to them? And I wonder if one way is not looking at the figures from Ireland, where the Republic of Ireland, Southern Ireland, has been almost 100% fluoridated. And Northern Ireland has only been 10% fluoridated. And they started the fluoridation 60 years ago. And the figures, I expect you've seen some of these from Dr. Moore, a scientist in Ireland. He's claiming sudden infant death syndrome, 300% increase, 3 times as much. Sarcoidosis, fatal cancer, 250% increase. Congenital hypothyroidism, which I mentioned, 220%. Osteoporosis, because people thought fluoride would stop osteoporosis, but it doesn't, it causes it, 100% increase. Diabetes, 60%. Depression, 78%. I wonder if you think these figures are real, that we could use these quotes in a letter to the Herald.
Well, first of all, I share your concerns about that epidemiological data. Much of it has been gathered very recently by Declan Wall, who's a technician and who in the Republic of Ireland. And part of his work has been to compare the prevalences of various diseases, so as has been just been mentioned, in the Republic of Ireland, which is largely fluoridated, and in Northern Ireland, which is not. And the anticipation of Declan Waugh in doing this was that these are very similar populations you would expect genetically in terms of the kind of work they do, the sizes of their families, the food they eat. See, all these other things are what we call confounding variables. Like you know that business of the decline in the prevalence of cavities associated with fluoridation would clearly what we see is that the confounding variables, like the better diet, the better health, dental care, and so on, are the things that are probably causative. So to separate out that kind of problem, you first of all try to get populations that are comparable in every way except for the variable that you're questioning, like how much fluoride you intake. And that's why Law was comparing initially just the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland, because he thought those confounding variables would not exist, and it was comparing those two populations. But he has extended that sort of work to examining data for many diseases, I would guess at least 20, in countries all over the world where the data exists. And there are huge differences in the prevalence of things like prostate cancer between the United States and say, the Netherlands, where there's no fluoridation. And he suspects that is largely due to exposure to fluoride. But that requires considerable more effort to say with great certainty. But what is a shame is that sort of finding is most often ignored, not acted upon. Like the government of the Republic of Ireland is doing everything it can to shut up at Beck and Dr, instead of doing everything it can to get investigations on the relationship between prostate cancer and fluoride exposure. And Waugh has done a tremendous amount of work. He wrote my first acquaintance with him was receiving from him a 334-page article. It wasn't peer-reviewed and published in a journal yet. And he had 1,200 references, and it was mostly just about the biochemical effects in the human. An incredible amount of work. And whether he's right or not, he certainly has cited a lot of literature that deserves examination. But to answer your question, at the very least, that requires us to quickly get on to determining the consequences of what Dick and Waugh has pointed out.
So just a quick comment there. Yeah, most certainly you're going to be hearing more about Declan research and about Ireland in general, because Ireland is one of the few remaining countries in the world that is basically mandated fluoridation for the whole nation. And so it's going to be a big change, a big switch, a big change in the flow of the direction of fluoridation around the world when Ireland goes non-fluoride. A couple of quick comments from the previous questions. Doctors for several years, back 40 or 50 years ago, used not very high doses of fluoride to treat hyperthyroidism. In other words, they knocked out overactive thyroid glands by using moderate doses of fluoride. So that tells you basically what it does to the thyroid system. And the other point to be made was we did use fluoride to treat osteoporosis for several years, a few decades back, as medical practitioners, because I think, as Mark alluded to, it made the bones thicker. And indeed, on X-ray and on DEXA scans, it did make the bones thicker, but they were not stronger. They were actually weaker. They were weakened by fluoride. So again, a very strong comment on what this ingestion of fluoride does and the accumulation, bioaccumulation, mostly in bone in your body, does to the skeletal structure. Next question.
Hi. I was just wondering if you have any suggestions on how we can reverse some of the ill health effects that I'm hearing are going to be staying with me for the rest of my life.
Probably the quickest thing you can reverse is the effect on the thyroid gland by having an adequate diet and no fluoride exposure, or a fluoride exposure as low as possible. Because that system will probably fairly rapidly respond to changes in exposure to fluoride. Most of the others will be very slow. Some will be irreversible. And I don't think we know what the answer to your question is for most such effects. The changes in the teeth, for example, and dental fluorosis are permanent and irreversible, except by cosmetic dentistry. They can be covered over, but it can't be reversed. And so, you know, that's all I can say about it. I don't want to move too far out of my reliable knowledge here.
I'll just tackle that one briefly. So basically, adequate doses of iodine are important. The other things that I alluded to in the first part of my talk, taking good care of yourself in many ways, shapes, and forms. So adequate good water, non-fluoridated water, walking daily, exercising 3 or 4 times a week aerobically, getting as many good vegetables, more than fruits actually, into your diet, and preferably organic growing, like Harvest Hills, just outside of Lethbridge here, grows for you. Taking supplementation too. So many people say, well, you know, we'd like to, we eat well, we go to Safeway, we buy good fruits and vegetables and whatever. And that's a really good thing to do. But unfortunately, the vast majority, unless you eat all your foods organically, all your meats, if you're a meatitarian like me, grass-fed and no antibiotics and no hormones, and maybe live up in the mountains away from all the pollution, and you know, not many people can realistically do that. So I'm a big fan of supplementation as well, and I think you should have a good multi-B on board. High doses of D, not this sort of spit in the ocean stuff that Health Canada says, 1,000 international units. Well, that's just a drop in the bucket. 5,000 I recommend for all my patients from October through April, 5,000 international units of D. And an endocrinologist in Calgary challenged me on that by sending one of my patients that came into him and told him that she was on 5,000, and he said, well, you're going to be toxic. So he measured her and sent a copy of the measurement to me as well. She came in to see me to see what her levels were. And at our very conservative Canadian levels, which are very, very low, our normal levels should be much, much higher. At our conservative normal levels here in Canada, she was at the bottom, just below the bottom end of normal on 5,000 international units. So vitamin D at high dose will certainly help. And vitamin E, as long as you take the natural and mixed vitamin Ds, are a good thing. And high doses, probably twice what they tell you in most bottles of omega-3 oils. So you take all those things combined with good water and exercise, maybe throw in a little meditation there too, and you'll be healthy.
We'll now just have some concluding comments from our speakers.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. If you don't want to drink it, and can you absorb fluoride through the skin? Like, for example, when you shower, your bath, or swimming, can you absorb fluoride into your body through your skin?
Absolutely. That's why it's so difficult to take fluoride out of the system. I mean, if you really want to get rid of fluoride in a fluoridated community, you have to use something like a complete home reverse osmosis system, which at last count I saw was about $2,000. So yes, you do absorb fluoride through your skin, so every time you bath or shower, you're taking fluoride in. And you also get it from numerous other sources. So a lot of the fruits and vegetables and fruit drinks and juices and etc. all have fluoride as well. A lot of the fruits and vegetables we get from far away are even sprayed with a fluoride compound to keep them from ripening too quickly. So fluoride from many, many sources. And so until we tackle this, not just locally, but globally, we're still going to have some problems. So no more questions. I'll just give a quick wrap up, and then Dr. Beck will have the last couple of words then. So you folks here in Lethbridge have a unique opportunity. You have an election coming up where there's a whole slate of practitioners running, and a good amount of them have actually come out and publicly stated that they're against water fluoridation. And I think that's highly commendable. That's not the norm in Alberta, at least. However, if you look at the facts and figures, about 42% of Canada is fluoridated, and now well less than 40% of Alberta. I think it's around 35% of Alberta is fluoridated. So fluoridation is in the minority, and that's that's one point you can drive home. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the main thing you can talk to your practitioners about are the ethics and morality of putting an untested, unproven, and basically illegal substance into your water, and not monitoring it, and not assessing for dose or dosage at all. All they're looking at is concentration, which is not dose. Dose is how much a person takes in on a daily basis, and dosage is the amount that, according to your body weight, you take in on a daily basis. So they never talk about that. They just say, oh, you're safe now because we've lowered the concentration from 1.2 to 1 part per million to 0.8 now to 0.7. Well, what is the safest level? Well, actually, it's 0. Tell your counselors that, please.
So I'm going to do you a favor. I won't say any more. So thank you for your attention, and my best wishes for you.
Say thank you to our speakers, and also for everyone who attended today and for your questions, and a big thank you to the organisers, and especially for Feature Productions for covering the event today. And there's going to be YouTube's available on this evening, and it looks like we have a good presentation. Come this way, Tony.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Beck, James Beck. And I find it quite touching that you appealed to your professor at the university and was able to attract the attention of your professor. So I'd like to make a presentation to Dr. Beck, Dr. Dickson. Thank you so much for being here and giving us reports from the front lines and for the public service. I think these gentlemen, it has to be made clear, there's nothing in it for them. This is a public service. And I see what we're doing tonight together as a public service. This is a serious issue. This is a health issue for us all. Anita Virginello, who's right here. Anita is heading up something called the Vegan Potluck. Every Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, there's a wonderful event at the YMCA, and people get together and we talk about health, GMOs, the need to get clean water, and it's a wonderful movement, and it's taking responsibility for our own community. And of course, last but not least, the incredible Peter Etches, who gave us lots of moderation of the event tonight. And I would like to specifically acknowledge one council candidate who's here, Rena Wass, who did expose the letters of James Talbot, and I thought that was very public-spirited of you to do so. And I would like to acknowledge as well Fluoride-Free Lethbridge, which is the pioneers of this movement, and I have a lot of expertise. I'm new to the movement. I think it's important at the University of Lethbridge that we show involvement in the community, and I know there's other professors who are on the pro-fluoride side. So thank you very much to the University of Lethbridge for being my backer, and last but not least, where I started, thank you to everyone here this evening. It was a memorable night, an important night in the history of Lethbridge. Thank you very much.
As we close now, if there's any journalists or members of the media, if you'd like to make your way here, if you have any questions for our speakers. Thank you.